Clay Brewer, 17. He is in prison for brutally murdering a counselor and assaulting another staff member during a violent escape attempt at a rehabilitation ranch for troubled youth. The events occurred on December 6, 2016, at the Turnabout Ranch in Garfield County, Utah, just 5 days after Brewer arrived at the facility. He was then 17 years old and he was sent to the ranch from Snowflake, Arizona, to deal with a severe pill and opioid addiction. According to court records, Brewer was experiencing severe drug withdrawals. He felt abandoned by his parents and had attempted suicide by drinking bleach the night before the attack. On the morning of the crime, he stated he woke up feeling heartless. While sitting around an outdoor campfire with other teenagers, he grabbed a heavy metal fire poker and attacked a counselor from behind. After the murder, Brewer attempted to steal the victim's truck. When it would not start, he tried to force his way into a nearby cabin where the other teenagers were hiding. A second staff member intercepted him, and Brewer struck her in the head before forcing her to surrender her car keys. He fled the scene in her vehicle, leading police on a high-speed chase exceeding 80 miles per hour before being apprehended. Upon his arrest, Brewer admitted he intended to feign having a weapon so that law enforcement would shoot and kill him. Jimmy Woolsey was 61 years old and a well-loved counselor at the ranch. He was struck in the head at least 10 times with the metal poker and died at the scene from blunt force trauma. The staff member who fought Brewer at the cabin door to protect the other youth was Alicia Keller, 35. She suffered head and hand injuries during the altercation. In July 2018, Brewer pled guilty to reduced charges of first-degree felony murder and second-degree felony aggravated assault. In exchange, the state dropped the remaining charges, including attempted aggravated murder and robbery. A judge sentenced Brewer to 5 years to life in prison for the murder and 1 to 15 years for the aggravated assault. The judge ordered the sentences to run concurrently. Jacob Brighton, 16. Brighton is in prison for executing his parents in cold blood inside their Florida home. On August 2, 2007, Brighton carried out what investigators described as a premeditated sneak attack. He waited inside his family's Fort Pierce, Florida home for his parents to stand close together with their backs turned toward him. Using his father's semi-automatic pistol, Brighton shot both parents to death between the kitchen and living room. After the murders, Brighton called a relative to confess, who then contacted law enforcement. When deputies arrived at the scene, Brighton flagged them down in the driveway and was taken into custody without incident. Richard Brighton was 47 years old and was Jacob's father. Penny Brighton was 46 and was Jacob's mother. During his interrogation, the kid originally told detectives he killed his parents because he felt like a constant disappointment to them due to smoking Mary Jane, lacking a job, and not sharing his father's interests. The prosecution also argued he was angry over being grounded for the summer. However, during his 2011 trial, the defense shifted tactics, claiming Brighton suffered from battered child syndrome and acted in self-defense following years of severe essay by his father. Prosecutors countered that Brighton only fabricated the abuse allegations 2 years after his arrest during psychological evaluations. He is serving life without the possibility of parole. David Brom. He was convicted of slaughtering 4 members of his family with an axe inside their Minnesota home when he was just 16 years old. The mass murder occurred on February 18, 1988 in Rochester, Minnesota. Following an intense argument with his father the previous evening, Brom used the household axe to violently assault his family while they were upstairs in their bedrooms. Each victim suffered severe, fatal gashes to the head and upper body. After committing the murders, Brom went to school the next morning and confessed the details of the crime to a classmate. The shocked classmate informed school administrator, who contacted the police. Olmsted County deputies discovered the bodies that evening, and Brom was arrested the following day at a local post office. The kid killed his entire immediate family, leaving only an older brother who did not live at the residence unharmed. Bernard Brom was 43 and David's father, Paulette Brom was 40, David's mother, Diane Brom was 14, David's younger sister, and Richard Brom was 9, David's younger brother. Brom was certified to stand trial as an adult. He pleaded not guilty by reason of mental illness. During the trial, psychiatrists agreed that Brom suffered from mental illness, but state experts testified that he was legally sane enough to understand that his actions were wrong. On October 16, 1989, a jury convicted him on 4 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Brom to 3 consecutive life sentences. Under the laws at the time, he was required to serve a minimum of 52.5 years before even becoming eligible to apply for parole. In 2023, Minnesota passed a law bringing the state into compliance with previous U.S. Supreme Court rulings regarding juvenile offenders. The law retroactively ended life without parole sentences for individuals who committed crimes as minors, making them eligible for parole consideration after serving 15 to 30 years. Because Brom had served 37 years with an exemplary behavior record, his case was reviewed by the state. On July 29, 2025, he was moved from the Lino Lakes prison to a work release program at a halfway house in the Twin Cities. On January 27, 2026, the Minnesota Supervised Release Board voted 5 to 2 to grant him full parole, placing him on supervised release under strict probation and GPS monitoring. Devontae Brown. Brown is serving a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for violently murdering his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend and her 14-year-old brother. The attack took place on August 10, 2015, inside a home in West Toledo, Ohio. Brown, who was 16 years old at the time, went to the residence fueled by rage following a teenage breakup with his ex-girlfriend, Jocelyn Jones. Once inside, the kid executed a brutal, multi-person assault. He stabbed 14-year-old Johnny Jones III multiple times and severely choked and essayed 16-year-old Jocelyn. When the teenager's mother, Josie Ann Thomas, tried to intervene to protect her children, Brown stabbed and severely wounded her as well. He then fled the scene, sparking a police pursuit before being apprehended. Jocelyn's brother sustained multiple stab wounds and died the day of the attack. Jocelyn suffered severe trauma from being essayed and choked, fighting for her life in a hospital until she succumbed to complications of strangulation nearly a month later. Josie Ann Thomas, the mother of the two children, sustained severe stab wounds but managed to survive the attack. On June 3, 2016, Brown avoided a full capital trial by entering an Alford plea in the Lucas County Common Pleas Court to charges including aggravating murder. An Alford plea meant he did not explicitly admit guilt but conceded that prosecutors possessed more than enough evidence to convict him at trial. Kira Brown. She is in prison for the shooting death of a teenage boy during a botched carjacking. She was just 13 years old at the time of the crime and became the youngest person in Wyandotte County, Kansas, ever to be tried as an adult. The incident occurred on July 30, 2008 in Kansas City, Kansas. Brown, who grew up in a highly unstable environment and had ties to local street gangs, attempted to steal a vehicle at gunpoint. During the confrontation, the carjacking took a turn for the worse. She fired a single bullet into the driver's head at close range before fleeing the scene. After the shooting, she attempted to cover her tracks by abandoning her clothes and washing herself off with a water hose. Scott Sappington Jr. was just 16, a local teenager. He had just dropped off his younger siblings at his grandmother's house and was driving away to go to his job when Brown targeted him. He died at the scene from a gunshot wound to the head. In January 2011, a jury rejected her claims of simply being an innocent bystander and found her guilty of first-degree felony murder and attempted aggravated robbery. Brown was sentenced to a mandatory hard 20 life sentence for the felony murder count and a concurrent 32-month sentence for the robbery charge. This meant she must serve a minimum of 20 years in prison before becoming eligible to apply for parole. Jacob Brown. He is in prison for brutally beating an elderly couple to death with a baseball bat inside their Tennessee home. He was 16 years old at the time of the murders. The crimes took place on February 21, 2011, in Munford, Tennessee. Brown had skipped school and was walking around the local neighborhood. Intending to commit a burglary, he entered the home of an elderly couple. Once inside, he used the baseball bat to beat the couple to death. Their bodies were discovered later that day by their daughter. Brown fled the scene and was arrested by law enforcement less than 48 hours later at a motel in nearby Millington, Tennessee, where he subsequently confessed. Ed Walker was 80, a local Munford resident. Bertha B. Walker was 75 and Ed's wife. Due to the severe nature of the double homicide, Brown was transferred from juvenile court to face charges as an adult. He was indicted on 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, 2 counts of felony first-degree murder, and 1 count of aggravated burglary. During his trial in January 2012, the defense highlighted his history of psychosis and mental health issues. Brown testified that demons told him to kill people or himself. Evidence was also presented regarding the potential impact that his consumption of bath salts had on his mental state during the crimes. On January 20, 2012, a Tipton County jury rejected the defense's arguments and found Brown guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brown later filed for post-conviction relief, arguing that a life sentence without parole for a juvenile violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. However, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld his sentence in 2016. Maisha Brown. Brown actually died while serving a 15-year sentence for the shooting murder of an elderly grandfather. She was 16 years old at the time of the crime, and she was found dead in her cell at a Tennessee state prison on March 19, 2022, at the age of 21. The murder took place on November 9, 2017, in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood of South Nashville, Tennessee. The victim was outside his family's home collecting a trash can when Brown approached and shot him. Witnesses reported seeing Brown raise a weapon before the gunfire. Following the shooting, Brown was arrested and initially held on bond. In January 2019, an organization named Epic Girl utilized online crowdsourcing to raise money and pay her $10,000 bail, allowing her temporary release. However, just 2 months later, in March 2019, Metro Police arrested her again after catching her with ecstasy pills and the keys to a stolen car. A judge immediately revoked her bond and she remained jailed until her trial. Roxanne Wang was 74, an elderly grandfather who had recently immigrated to the US from China to live with his family. He was fatally shot just outside his son's newly purchased home. To avoid a full trial, Brown accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder. On March 19, 2022, correctional officers found Brown unresponsive inside her prison cell. The Tennessee Department of Corrections launched an investigation into her passing. Following her death, her family publicly spoke out, stating that Brown had frequently complained about safety issues, systemic neglect, and conflicts with prison guards. They argued that at 16 years old, she was not mature enough for an adult women's maximum security prison and should have instead been placed in a juvenile rehabilitation program. Nicholas Browning. He is in prison for executing his parents and two younger brothers as they slept inside their Maryland home. He was 15 years old at the time of the mass murder. The crimes took place on the night of Friday, February 1, 2008, in the affluent Baltimore suburb of Cockeysville, Maryland. Browning, a former Boy Scout and honor student at Dulaney High School, had a disagreement with his father earlier in the evening. After his family went to sleep, Browning took his father's 9mm handgun and systematically walked through the house, shooting each family member in the head. Prosecutors later noted that he carried out the executions with the cold precision of a professional hitman. Following the killings, Browning threw the handgun into a nearby bush, walked to a friend's house, and spent the rest of the weekend hanging out, partying, and playing video games. On Saturday afternoon, friends drove him back home. Browning went inside alone, walked back out, and falsely claimed to his friends that he had just discovered his father dead. He was arrested early Sunday morning after breaking dawn and confessing to a police during an interrogation. Investigators later learned that he had joked with friends on the school bus about killing his family for inheritance money prior to the crime, though his peers had dismissed it as a joke. Browning killed his entire immediate household. John Browning was 45, Nicholas's father, a local attorney. Tamara Browning was 44 and Nicholas's mother. Gregory Browning was 13 years old, his younger brother, and Benjamin Browning was 11 years old, his youngest brother. Browning was charged as an adult with 4 counts of first-degree murder. In October 2008, he accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to all 4 counts to avoid a potential life without parole sentence. The exact motive remains a point of heavy dispute. The defense claimed that the killings were a desperate breaking point resulting from years of severe emotional and physical abuse inflicted by Nicholas's strict alcoholic father. Conversely, prosecutors strongly rejected the battered child syndrome defense, arguing that Nicholas was a sociopathic teenager who murdered his parents because he simply hated their rules and killed his young brothers strictly so he would not have to split his family's financial inheritance. On January 23, 2009, Baltimore County Circuit Judge Thomas Bollinger sentenced Browning to 4 life sentences. He ordered 2 of the life terms to run consecutively, which is back to back, and 2 to run concurrently at the same time. Under the terms of his plea and Maryland state law, Browning was not given life without parole. He becomes eligible to apply for parole consideration for the first time in 2031 after serving a mandatory minimum of 23 years with good behavior. In January 2014, Browning returned to court to ask for a sentence reduction or a transfer to a youth offender program that would accelerate his path to freedom. A judge completely denied the request, citing the sheer brutality of destroying his entire family. He remains incarcerated in a Maryland state prison. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.